Thank you, Madam Speaker. Colleagues, I want to tell you a story. About 35 years ago, I was a first-year law student, and life was simpler then. Everything was kind of black and white. And so I was in a course, and we were going through a case that had gone to the Supreme Court, and at the end of it, I went up and talked to the professor, and in the course's conversation, I said something like, I don't see what the big deal was. I mean, anybody would know that this is unconstitutional. At which time the professor said, what did you say? I said, well, I mean, it's obvious, isn't it? He said, obvious? I want you to know that this case was decided by a federal court judge in one way. It went to an appellate court, a federal appeals court, and was reversed by a close decision. And then it went to the U.S. Supreme Court, which reversed the appellate court decision by a 5-4 decision. And you think it was obvious? So I was humbled, and I was young, and it just kind of reminded me as we have this discussion here about it's obvious that this PERS bill that's being proposed is unconstitutional. Well, maybe it is and maybe it isn't. But I know that in 2003, when I was on the PERS Reform Committee, we were listening to recommendations and so forth, and we were told that the recommendations that we were proposing back then were unconstitutional. But it wasn't until they got to the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice wrote the opinion that was over 100 pages long, finding that some were constitutional and some weren't. And so before we try and decide what a Supreme Court would do, maybe we ought to have some basic agreements. One is, none of us want to violate the PERS Constitution or the PERS contracts. Okay, I mean, that's not what we want to do. But nevertheless, we have a PERS crisis. It's costing us $1.1 billion in the current biennium, $900 million in the next biennium. That's $2 billion off the top if we don't do something. And so in talking recently to another retired attorney who happened to be a former justice of Oregon Supreme Court, he said, what you do, if you want my suggestion, is give multiple recommendations because the Supreme Court is going to have to struggle with it. And if you base it on just one or two things and you lose, you're done. But if you give multiple reforms, multiple recommendations, then a decision can be made that will determine what is contractual and what is legislative, so that we can have the benefit of that which is legislative and not violate a contract. Thank you.